The episode begins with an atmosphere charged with tension. Patrick, Jane, and Agent Lisbon arrive at a middle-class neighborhood that has been taken over by police, ambulances, and a swarm of news cameras. The body of a missing teenager, Mercy Toliver, has finally been found in the basement of a neighboring house. The main suspect is a boy from the neighborhood, somewhat gloomy and with a record, who was the one who supposedly found the corpse. While the young girl's parents, the Tolivers, offer an improvised press conference in front of their house, the tragedy is palpable. Mr. Toliver speaks into the microphones with a mixture of pain and indignation, while Mrs. Toliver remains by his side in absolute silence, staring into space with a visibly reluctant attitude, as if she did not want to be there. Meanwhile, ignoring all police protocol, Patrick Jane walks away from Lisbon and naturally enters the Tolivers' house. Without asking permission, he begins to explore the intimacy of the home. He walks through the kitchen, looks at the family photographs, and with a disconcerting calm, decides to make himself at home. He prepares a cup of tea and serves himself a sandwich, analyzing every detail of the environment around him. When Mrs. Toliver enters the house, exhausted by the siege of the press, she finds this stranger sitting in her dining room. Instead of confronting her with legal technicalities, Jane invites her to sit down and begins to speak to her with brutal honesty about her daughter's death. With his characteristic style of observation, Patrick guides her through an uncomfortable conversation. He asks her directly what she thinks happened, and with an almost cruel subtlety, throws out the forbidden question, whether she believes her own husband could be the culprit. Broken by Jane's insight, confesses a memory that torments her. She recalls how, during the last year, her husband and her daughter behaved in a strange and tense manner when they were near each other. With tears in her eyes, she expresses her deep regret for not having listened or understood when her daughter tried, on several occasions, to explain what was happening. At that moment, Mr. Toliver enters the room. Jane, without standing up and with the sandwich still half finished, confronts him directly. "I'm with the police. Did you kill your daughter?" The reaction is immediate. The man appears startled and bursts into defensive anger, threatening to make Jane's life miserable for such an accusation. Patrick, unperturbed, observes his body language and coldly comments that an innocent man, faced with such an insult, would simply have punched him in the face instead of making legal threats. Upon seeing her husband's reaction, Mrs. Toliver finally puts the pieces together in her mind. The realization that the monster was sleeping in her own bed consumes her. In a state of total agitation, she stands up, takes a gun from a nearby drawer, and before anyone can react, shoots her husband several times in the chest. Teresa Lisbon and the rest of the officers rush in after hearing the gunshots, only to find a nightmarish scene. The husband dead on the floor, the wife in shock with the gun in her hand, and Patrick Jane, who simply raises his hands with a slight smile and says, "Honestly, it's not as bad as it looks." 2 weeks after that incident, the CBI, California Bureau of Investigation, arrives in Palm Springs to take on a new case. Lisbon, Rigsby, Cho, and the new addition, Grace Van Pelt, who is trying to quickly adapt to the group's pace, face a double homicide scene that bears all the marks of a serial killer, Red John. Patrick Jane suddenly appears at the scene. Even though he is still suspended due to the chaos he caused in the Toliver case, he has no intention of staying out. He tries to persuade Lisbon to let him work, arguing with unusual intensity that Red John belongs to him. Faced with Teresa's refusal, Jane decides to ignore her authority and contacts the CBI superiors directly, managing to have his suspension lifted. With a mixture of arrogance and vulnerability, he promises Lisbon that this time he will redeem himself. The victims are Allison Randolph, wife of a golf professional, and Dr. Gregory Tannen, a physician and family friend. The scene is macabre. The doctor was murdered with a golf club, while Allison was found in her bed, drained of blood after a precise cut, following Red John's ritual. On the wall, painted with the victim's blood, stands out the famous smiling face, the killer's signature. However, after just one glance, Jane breaks the tension with a blunt statement. This is not Red John. He explains that the smiling face is on the wrong wall. According to his deep and painful knowledge of the killer, Red John always places his signature in a spot where it is the first thing you see when you enter the room, as an immediate visual impact. Patrick assures them that they do not need his help to catch an imitator and walks away. After reviewing old files, Lisbon and her team discover that Jane is right. The pattern does not match. Swallowing her pride, Teresa calls Patrick to ask him to return, but he, who had actually never left the building, walks into the office a second later, taking advantage of the moment to formally introduce himself to a confused Van Pelt. The investigation splits up. Cho and Rigsby interview the victim's husband, Price Randolph, and his brother, Tag, who have an alibi. They were playing golf over the weekend. On the other hand, Jane and Lisbon visit Dr. Tannen's office to speak with his partner, Dr. Linus Wagner. Jane, always looking for what is not obvious, asks whether Tannen kept a personal diary, something Wagner denies. Before leaving, in an apparently random move, Jane asks Wagner to prescribe him sleeping pills. When the doctor refuses, claiming that he needs a formal appointment, Jane dismisses it with an enigmatic smile. That night, during a team dinner, Grace questions Patrick about his past as a fake psychic. Jane is blunt. He does not believe in the afterlife or in psychic powers, defining himself now as an observer of human nature. The conversation becomes uncomfortable when Jane, to demonstrate his abilities, embarrasses Rigsby by revealing in front of everyone that he has romantic intentions toward Grace. Later, in the solitude of his hotel room, Jane finds a note that has been slipped under his door. The message is chilling. "Greetings, old friend. It has been a while. I hope you are well. I am happy and thriving. I have 12 wives now and will soon court number 13. Why can't you catch me? You must feel so powerless, stupid, and sad. Anyway, my best wishes. Red John." Although the message is disturbing, Jane remains calm. He knows that Red John is too intelligent to risk being captured just for such a direct taunt. He concludes that the note is another forgery by the imitator. Despite Lisbon ordering him to rest, Jane stays up all night, focused and writing frantically in a journal. The next morning, the exhaustion is evident on Jane's face. Lisbon, noticing that he has not slept, decides to play along and gets him the appointment he wanted so badly with Dr. Wagner. Meanwhile, the forensic lab confirms Patrick's suspicions. The Red John note contained traces of Allison's blood and a hair belonging to Tag, the widower's brother. When questioned, Tag confesses that he was having a secret affair with his sister-in-law, which gives the team a clear motive. The husband, Price, could have killed them out of revenge. Everything seems to indicate that the case is closed, but Jane knows that the truth is more complex. Patrick attends his appointment with Dr. Wagner. During the session, the narrative takes us back 5 years through a heartbreaking flashback. We see a very different Jane, a television celebrity in an elegant suit with impeccable hair, who made a living as a fake psychic. In an interview, Jane boasted about helping the police capture Red John, mocking the killer on national television by describing him as a small, ugly, and tormented man, a lonely and sad soul. Upon returning home that night, Jane found a note taped to his bedroom door. The message read, "Dear Mr. Jane, I do not like being slandered in the media, especially by a dirty and greedy fraud. If you were a real psychic, you would not need to open the door to see what I have done to your lovely wife and daughter." When he opened the door, the first thing he saw was the smiling face in blood on the wall, and beneath it, the bodies of his family. That was the moment the psychic died and the consultant seeking justice was born. Back in the present, Jane shares none of this with Wagner. Instead, he invents a series of fictional stories about his life. The doctor, detecting the falsehood, asks him why he lies when it is obvious that he carries real pain. Jane, recovering his mask, simply replies, "The truth is mine." Before leaving, Jane casts his final bait. He mentions Tannen's diary again, assuring him that someone confirmed its existence and that the police would search the office the next day. As he says goodbye, Jane gives the doctor a warm hug, a gesture that seems grateful but hides a magician's trick. Shortly after, Dr. Wagner, consumed by paranoia, heads to his office in the middle of the night to get rid of the evidence. As he searches desperately, Jane appears in the doorway. Calmly, Patrick pulls a diary from beneath a shelf. Wagner, cornered, draws a gun and points it at him. Jane reveals the truth. He himself wrote that diary the night before to lure him. Wagner killed his partner Tannen because he was going to report him for financial fraud, and he murdered Allison only to make the crime look like the work of a serial killer and thus divert attention. Jane deceives the doctor into believing that he removed the bullets from the gun through a sleight-of-hand trick during that hug. Wagner hesitates for a second, which gives Jane the necessary time to distract him and get to safety just as Rigsby and the team burst in to arrest the doctor. The next day, the atmosphere in the office is bittersweet. The team is upset with Jane for keeping them in the dark and for allowing the victim's family to be harshly questioned while he already knew who the culprit was. However, Jane manages to break the ice with Lisbon by giving her a small paper frog made with origami. When she touches it, the frog jumps, drawing an involuntary smile from the agent. The episode ends with Patrick returning home at dusk. It is the same mansion from the flashback, but now it is empty, without furniture or paintings, turned into a shell of memories. Jane walks upstairs to the room where the tragedy occurred. On the bare wall, the smiling face drawn by Red John still remains there, like an indelible stain. Patrick, still dressed, lies down on a simple mattress on the floor, just beneath his enemy's mark, closing his eyes to face one more night of insomnia and obsession. And that brings us to the end of the summary of the pilot of The Mentalist, a fundamental episode that not only introduces us to Patrick Jane's abilities, but also marks the beginning of his obsessive hunt against Red John, an enemy who always seems to be one step ahead. If you liked the video, do not forget to leave your like and subscribe so you do not miss the upcoming stories. If you want to continue discovering how Jane uses his mind to solve the most complex cases, on the channel you will find the complete playlist with all the episodes in order.